Games is Lit 101. It's Valentine's Day. Or, well, you know, it was. I mean, it was a couple days ago, but this show goes up on Mondays, and, you know, it was the closest Monday to... You know what? Whatever. Let's just talk about romance. Romance in games has been a very interesting topic. I think it's safe to say that the medium doesn't actually touch on the subject much, or at least not nearly as much as other mediums tend to. There have been some pretty great examples of romantic relationships in video games, but for the most part, all we tend to get is a shallow romantic interest for the main character, who is usually male, and it's really rare that we actually get a game that is explicitly and centrally about romance. Compare that to all of the chick flicks that flood the theater all year long, or the stacks of romance novels out there, and yeah, video games are kind of weirdly devoid of the topic. That said, when a video game does take on romance as a central theme, the results have been interesting and varied, and occasionally kind of creepy. BioWare's games, like Mass Effect and Dragon Age, are the most prominent examples, but it's also been handled differently in games like Fire Emblem, Awakening, Catherine, and a whole ton of visual novels. That said, many modern approaches to interactive romance stories have gotten a fair amount of criticism. For instance, as much as people seem to connect with BioWare's characters like Tolly or Alistair— Whoa! Alright, yes, Alistair. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. That was my wife, and she really likes Alistair. So obviously something works, right? They've got something right. But regardless, I have actually read a good deal of criticisms on their system for romance, and indeed of how romance is portrayed in video games as a whole. So today we're going to talk about some of those issues and see what we can discover. The criticism basically comes down to one basic and simple fact of the medium. Everything comes down to numbers. It's something that we're quick to forget now. By and large, video games have gotten very good at obscuring that fact, but it is still true. Video games are computer programs, so everything, absolutely everything, needs to be empirically measurable, including romance. The simplest and possibly most established illustration of how this works is found in romantic visual novels. The player takes on the role of the protagonist and is introduced to a variety of supporting characters with which a romance is possible. As the game progresses, the player talks with all of these characters, and what they say will affect a score in the background of the game. So for instance, if you tell one character they look good, that might up your score with that character by 1, whereas if you tell them they look terrible, it might take away a point instead. Then certain events in the story trigger based on your points with each of the characters, usually culminating in one specific point where you lock yourself into a romance with the character you've accumulated the most points with. Your choices after that point will determine where the story goes with your relationship. As you can see, the process is very cut and dry, quite unlike real-life romance. Say the right things, do the right stuff, and you get the girl. And considering that a lot of video games tend to indicate the fulfillment of a romantic relationship with a sex scene, I can see how there might be a bit of an issue here. We talk a lot in this show about games rising above their mechanics or using them to mean something more. But when we look at the mechanics behind romance in video games, it's really no different from anything else. Make the right choices, get enough points, and you get rewarded with romance, and maybe even sex, and when you say it like that, it just sounds disgusting. That said, those mechanics are in the background. We don't actually see them when we're playing the game, and video games do usually communicate their stories by obscuring gameplay and mechanics with narrative context. So, what does this actually look like to the player? You meet someone. You've met a few characters since the game started, but this one really catches your attention. When you have the chance to talk, you're nice to this person, and you try to understand more about them. You really like this person, and you begin to show them special attention. You continue learning about them, and you start doing things that they appreciate because you care about them. Eventually, you start dating. Perhaps sometimes you do something that upsets them, and hopefully you work it out with them and move past it. Or maybe you don't, and the relationship doesn't work out. That sounded a lot more natural, right? The mechanics were still running things in the background, but that's not actually what's being presented to us. We don't see the mechanics, we see characters, and we make decisions based on our interpretations of those characters, not based on what's gonna get us the most points and lead us to victory, however you'd even define victory in something so complex as romance. Video games are based almost entirely around the idea of using mechanics as structure for an experience. All the aesthetic elements of a game, from the visuals to the audio to the story and even to the controls, are all designed to make you feel like you're not just manipulating numbers in a program, you are actually part of a story. And we see that all the time in video games. We may not see damage numbers in Halo, but everything is being run by them nonetheless. Each weapon deals a specific amount of damage, has a specific reload time, has a specific rate of fire. But we, the players, don't base our decisions on which weapon is statistically better, but which one feels better, which is more enjoyable to use. We see all these things more abstractly than they actually are, mechanically speaking. Everything is governed by the numbers, but we don't see those. We just know how it feels to fire the weapon, and about how much precision we need, how easy it is to keep the gun aimed where we need it to be. It is still run by all these equations, but it's obscured from us, so we can enjoy the illusion, belief that we're actually firing a gun and killing an alien, not just pressing a button and starting a mathematical reaction in a computer program. A basic concept of game design is that designers and players approach the game from opposite directions. Whereas designers start with the mechanics, use them to develop dynamics, and arrange everything to present a certain aesthetic of play, we players experience the aesthetic first and must uncover the mechanical details through analysis. Mechanics are made to imitate life, like art does, and while the mechanics are there, what we see and experience is the life. What this means to romance is that there may be static mechanics behind the scenes, but that's not what we actually see, and as a result, it's not really what informs our experience. Assuming a game is well written, we won't see mechanics, we'll see characters. We'll make our decisions based on our disposition toward them. We'll base our choices on our own values and desires, and we'll feel accomplished and fulfilled when we grow romantically close to a character, not because we got enough points to win them, but because we genuinely feel connected to them. Some games have even subverted what I would expect to be normal for a character to succeed in a relationship. I've played a game where I actually had to let a girl work through some issues that she was dealing with instead of trying to rush in and save her myself. And I've played another game where supporting the goals of the woman I fell in love with actually meant the end of the relationship. Situations like this do display a far more nuanced concept of romance than get enough nice points, get the girl. When it comes down to it, video games are computer programs. They are run by numbers and equations, but to assume from that everything in them has to be goal-oriented and viewed as a challenge to be overcome really misses the point of what video games can accomplish as an art form. And I think if you want to actually see how this can work and how it has worked, you only need to look at how many guys fell for Tali, or how girls completely fell for Alistair. Whoa! So what do you think? Do you think that all the attempts to simulate romance in video games so far have all just fallen flat, or have you actually been personally affected by one of the examples? Go ahead and talk about it in the comments. Next week, we return to our regularly scheduled programming by giving the literary analysis treatment to Thomas Was Alone, a wonderful little indie gem about friendship, artificial intelligence, and minimalist art. So until then, class dismissed.